All right, let's make sure we're recording. Good. Okay, so this is a video explanation of this Autotune complete assignment. Okay, if you look at the assignment already, you might notice some spots where I said I'm going to have videos, right? That's the videos I'm making right now. Um, but this assignment's one of our first big ones in the guidance and control class. You flew your quad last semester or prior semester in the maintenance class, and now we're going to tune the aircraft and get it flying much better. This will allow it to perform better in general under manual flight as well as under automated flight when we do missions and things like that later in the semester. So I will talk about this assignment in class as well. This is a kind of a review video, I guess you could say. If you forget how to do things when you're at home and you can't remember what I said or whatever, you can review this video and hopefully it helps you get through the assignment process. It is a fairly involved assignment. There's multiple parts to this assignment that all kind of lead up to getting the aircraft tuned well. Um, so you can kind of think of it as multiple assignments together or one big assignment, however you want to do that. But I'm going to go through this a little bit and talk you through how this assignment should work. Okay, so um, we all have our copters basically should be flyable from the previous semester. In a different video, I'm going to talk about updating the firmware, where I'll update to the latest firmware this semester, and then we're going to go through this process. Okay, so the assignment is completed when you show me that you have auto-tuned or manually tuned your aircraft and that it flies well without oscillation. Okay, so oscillation is when it's kind of wobbling or I guess kind of just shaking back and forth. And typically that happens when the PIDs are not adjusted correctly for the aircraft, or there's excessive noise from vibration or improper filtering or things like that. All of that's taken care of in this assignment is the idea anyways. And so you will be working on that in this assignment for the next couple weeks. Okay, so there's 4 items that are going to be required for this assignment to be turned in completely. One of them is an extended tuning page screenshot after you've auto-tuned your aircraft. Okay. There's a pre-filter graph, a post-filter graph, and then there's an actual flight data or data flash log from the aircraft flying in auto-tune flight mode with a success message in the log. Okay, so we'll talk about what that looks like here in this video. There are some steps here I've outlined, A, B, C, D, E, okay? And there's a little bit of difference whether you have an S500 or an X500. I'll address that in a specific video, but this is kind of the general overview. And so each of these steps has a link to a wiki page from ArduPilot, and that should help you go through the process. But as I guess a verbal reminder of what this is, step number A, or step letter A, I should say, is checking your vibration levels. So when we mount our flight controllers to the aircraft, and we tidy up all those wires and make sure things aren't flopping around when we're flying, that all helps the vibration levels. If our vibration levels are too high on our aircraft, we can't really go any further. We can't do altitude hold, we can't do loiter mode, and all these things depend on basically the vibration being low enough that the flight controller can actually measure what's going on the aircraft. If we have vibration levels that are too high, the flight controller becomes oversaturated, or the sensors on it become oversaturated, and basically they're maxed out. They can't measure anymore because they're already at their max level. You can imagine like a thermometer. If the thermometer only goes up to 150 degrees, okay, after 150 degrees, you can't measure anything else. It could be 160, it could be 180, it could be 200 degrees, but you're not going to know if the measurement only goes up to 150. So our flight controllers have a certain level they can measure. If we oversaturate them or have too much vibration, so they're all at 100% vibration level, we could say, then you can't measure anything anymore, and the flight controller can't actually fly the aircraft very well, or at all. So if we click on this link here, we'll go to the measure and vibration page, and this tells you how to measure them. You can do it live if you're doing it via telemetry and you have someone helping you while you're flying, or you can view the data flash log message, which all of you should have practiced in that log analysis assignment already. So go through this page. Basically, there is a safe number we don't want to go over. I think they say it down here somewhere. Let's see here. Okay, so we have our data flash logs, and we're going to review the messages for the acceptable range. Okay, they give you this X and Y range here and the Z range. Okay, I think they've updated this. They used to say up to 30 meters per second was okay, and that's doable, but the better or the less vibration you have, the better. Most of you will hopefully be somewhere in the single digits as far as vibrations go. Okay, so just take a look at that on your copter after a flight, right? Oh, here we go. Recorded vibe levels are mostly below 30 meters per second per second. Okay. So make sure that's the first step there is making sure the vibe levels are low enough to actually do anything else. If they're too high, we got to fix that first before we do anything else in the assignment. And typically that will mean, oh, you forgot to put one of the nuts on the flight controller, so it's loose. There's wires that are vibrating on the flight controller. These kind of things you have to figure out. Physically, there's not much you can do in the software to get the vibration lower if it's a hardware issue. Okay. So once that's done, that's kind of just a check. There's nothing really to turn in for this letter A step. Okay, the next step is configure and fly, set up altitude hold flight mode correctly. Okay, so for this one, you're going to need to fly in step A. You can also kind of set up step B at the same time. And if you look at the vibration levels live, okay, while you're flying, you have someone help you look at them on your mission planner live while you're flying, then you could just roll right into step B. So it could be advantageous to have a partner with this, and you kind of just take turns. If the vibration levels are okay, then you go, okay, sweet, I'm going to jump right in altitude hold flight mode and do that setup. Okay, again, that page is right here. Okay, and so we have the pilot's preparation for first flight. You want to make sure you read through this section here. Okay, and then we talk about setting altitude hold up, and what that is basically setting up a new flight mode on your flight controller and on your transmitter. Okay, and then we should not take off in altitude hold, but should be taken off and stabilize and switch in altitude hold. Okay, and what you do is you're teaching. We'll say we're teaching the flight controller what a good altitude hold is. Let's see if we can find, here it is down here, test altitude hold. Okay, so this is the section that you'll be working on. You're going to be taking off and stabilize, flip to altitude hold. You want to go to about 5 meters or so 30 feet in the air or so. Switch to altitude hold and be ready to switch back. Okay, but you should be okay with most of these. You shouldn't see this fast oscillation typically with these aircraft that we're using. Okay, but you want to watch for it, and then you're going to stay at that 5 meters. Okay, you're visually trying to keep the copter about the same altitude, and do at least 30 seconds for at least a minute or so. Try to keep it that same altitude visually, and then you can bring it back and land. Okay, so you're saying, hey, flight controller, I'm going to help you understand what a good hover throttle is. Okay, what a good hover setting is on our throttle to allow the aircraft to stay at the same altitude for a period of time. What this does is it helps altitude work, obviously, but then also flight modes like loiter or the GPS flight modes. Okay, the aircraft knows that, hey, if I stay at this throttle setting, that's a pretty good hover in place. So we're kind of teaching it what that is. All right. Once you've done that, okay, and you want to follow those steps, right? So we're gonna make sure this parameter is set. We're gonna take off, fly for at least 30 seconds, I'd say a minute or so, land and disarm, and then set these parameters down here. Okay. And once that's done, you test flight again, make sure altitude hold is working correctly. Okay, if it starts to oscillate up and down, then you need to make some other adjustments. Okay, and up to about right there, that's as far as you need to go in this step B. Okay. One thing that people get confused on sometimes is the way they've written this in the wiki. I don't think is the greatest, but you'll set this parameter before you fly, and then after you land, you'll look for this parameter, Mach thrust hover, and it will have a value in it. Typically it's around 0.25 or so. Okay, whatever it is for you, you want to take that value, times it by 2, and whatever that is, so let's say it's 0.25, so we say 0.5. We're going to put 0.5 into this parameter. Okay, and then let's see, I should get my mouse thing up. I just got one of these mouse highlight things, so let's try this. There we go. Okay, so you're going to take this value and times it by 2. Okay, and put it into here, and you're going to take that same value and just put it straight into here. After you make those adjustments, then you go and test fly again in altitude hold to make sure it's working and not oscillating up and down. Okay, so that's what this step B is here. Okay, so nothing to really turn in per se for that. But if this isn't working, nothing else is going to really work. Okay, so please make sure you set these up. Make sure your vibration levels are okay and your altitude hold is working before you try to do anything else, because it's not going to work if you're not doing that correctly. Okay, step C. So this is where we start to gather some specific data to help us tune or filter and tune our quadcopters. Okay, so this is a setting you'll turn on, the IMU batch sampling. Okay, and that's not turned on by default. We'll turn it off after we're done with this assignment. Basically, it adds a lot of extra data points to our flight logs. Okay. And so what that does is it allows us to use those data points to figure out where to put our filters and things like that. Okay, so if you click on this link here, measuring vibration with IMU batch sampler, okay, basically this is a special function that can turn on and record high frequency data from the IMU sensors to the data flash log. It's not done all the time, okay, but we can turn it on and off. You can analyze it post-flight to diagnose vibration issues using graphs from the fast Fourier transform, FFT. All right, you can read this. It is interesting. FFT is used in a lot of things, not just drones, but it allows us to see um, a lot of the vibrations in I guess, a more 2D or graph type appearance. Okay. So on this page, we're going to scroll down here to where it says pre-flight setup. All right. And here are the parameters we're going to be making sure we set. Okay. So INS lock bat op to 4. Okay. Some of these parameters, I'll show you. You don't always set them directly as a number. Sometimes it'll pop up, do a pop-up in Mission Planner, and that can be confusing. I'll show that to you in a second. But once you select the right checkboxes in the pop-up, it will basically set the number to 4. Okay, so that if that makes sense. Let's look at that real quick. Mission Planner, go into my config, full parameter list. To show you what I mean here, INS, what was it? INS log bat op. Okay, let's see here. There it is. Okay. So if I click on this, it has this pop-up, right? So I can't, it's becomes kind of confusing to try to change this actual number. You don't need to worry about changing the number. Just deselect this. If it's selected, and then select pre and post filter, which is what it tells us to do, and we see it changes that number to 4. So as I select different options, it changes the number to different things. Okay. So you just change the options, pre and post filter, and we see that it's 4 there. Can then write the parameters, and then we're good. Okay, let's go back over here. All right, so set these parameters here. Okay, or read through this. Basically, just need to set these first 2 parameters, and if you're using the S500, you only have 1 IMU. Okay, if you have the X500, you do have 2 IMUs or inertial measurement units on your flight controller. You can just collect data from one of them, or you collect data from both of them. It doesn't really matter too much for this, I don't think. Okay, and once you've done that, right, let's go back over here. Okay, gather the data so the noise can be filtered. So this is how we set up to gather the data. Let me clear this out a little bit. Okay, we're going to perform a regular flight of at least 1 minute. Okay, so not just a gentle hover. So like fly around a little bit, do some circles or whatever you're going to do. It doesn't have to be super aggressive, but you can't just be hovering, there for the whole minute. We want to get some dynamic flight in there. Okay, this is download the data flash log. So again, we're going to download the logs from your copter. And then we're going to open Mission Planner, and there's a setup advanced thing here. So if you see this, okay, setup advanced FFT, okay, and then you're going to open the IMU batch sample and open the log you just downloaded. Okay, if you try to open this IMU batch sample and nothing happens, that means you probably, let's get out of this, oops. That means you probably didn't set this up correctly. That's the most common mistake. Okay, if you don't set this up to log pre and post filter, then when you try to go to this here and open it, and nothing's going to happen because there's no IMU batch data in the log. Okay, so that's the most common thing. All right, and then you're going to get a bunch of graphs. Okay, and so here it talks about you get basically a photo like this. Now this is showing, if you look here, ACC, gyro. Okay. We don't care about the ACC, that's the accelerometer for this. We don't care about that. We just care about the gyroscope. Okay, so let's go back to the explanation here. So you want to look for peaks in the noise. Okay, so identify a significant peak in the noise that corresponds to motor rotational frequency. All right, excuse me. On a smaller copter, about around 200 hertz, and a larger copter, about 100 hertz. I'll tell you, the S500s are typically around 100 hertz or so. Okay. This example is from a 5-inch quad. Okay, so this is much higher, I guess, rotational, closer to 200 here. We'll get some peaks on ours closer to 100, but you'll have to look at yours specifically to see that. If you look down here in the examples, I do have a gyro pre-notch filter, and we see it a peak here, and I have my cursor in the screenshot. It's around 100. We see 200 up here is a peak around 100. Okay, so you're looking for those peaks, right? And those peaks are where we want to put filters, basically. Okay, so once you've gotten to this stage, you've set up the IMU, you've done a flight, and you've got some data. Now comes a little bit of analysis. Okay, you can read through this, let's see what they're talking about with this specific screenshot. Um, Basically, what we want to do is we're going to apply some notch filters to that noise to get that peak that's corresponding to the motors to be, essentially ignored by the flight controller, because that's always going to be there. The motors are always rotating when we're flying, so it doesn't really make any sense for the copter to pay attention to the motor rotational vibrations as much. Okay, we want it to pay attention to things like wind disturbances and things like that, but the motors are always going to be there, so there's no real reason for us to spend extra resources and things like that to address these vibrations from the motor. Okay, so let's go back up here. There we go. Okay, so gather the data to analyze the noise that can be filtered. Okay, so that's those peaks again right here. We talked about the peaks. Okay, if we look a little bit closer here, we see he's identifying the peaks in this screenshot here, and he talks about harmonics as well. Okay, so that's really important to realize something called a harmonic. Okay, let's see if he talks about it here. Okay, there will usually be harmonics of the motor rotational frequency 2 times, 3 times that frequency also. Okay, so in his case, here we have 180 and then we have roughly 360. Okay, so that's a harmonic. It's 2 times 180 is 360. Okay, I'll tell you on the S500s, I've typically seen around 100 hertz and then again around 200 hertz. Okay, the 200 hertz is a harmonic of 100 hertz because it's 100 times 2. Okay, so the harmonics will be addressed by the filter as well and help us to get to a stage where we don't have as much noise. Let's look at this one here actually. Okay, so here's the pre-notch filter, and we applied some filters, and now we have a post-notch filter. And if you look at the amplitude here, okay, 0 to about 0.1, we go here 0 to about 0.003-ish right there, okay. We don't pay too much attention to the really low frequency. We can't filter that without introducing a lot of delay. But we see here this noise that was at, 0.1, 0.05 before is now so small, it's hardly noticeable unless the graph is scaled such that it shows up. Okay, so that's decent. The post-notch filter, I put a filter on this one at 38 hertz, and it filtered a lot of that noise. Okay. So that's what we're going for. Once you have the data, you're welcome, of course, ask me for help if you need any help with this stuff. Okay, but the next step back here is to apply the dynamic notch filter and verify the functionality through logs. Okay, so here's where the video is going to diverge a little bit. I'll make specific videos talking about the S500s versus the X500s, but the general premise here is we're going to apply a notch filter to the aircraft on those spots where we have the peaks. Okay. Once you've applied the notch filter, you go and fly it again, and then you'll make sure it's working, that it's actually, taking care of that noise. We'll do another log and say, hey, where's the noise? Looks like it's gone. Great, it's being filtered. It's good. Okay. So I'm going to skip down to step E here, and I'll address the specific things here in the other separate videos. Okay, once you've applied the filters, you're going to then complete the auto-tune process, okay, to help tune your aircraft. All right, so let's go ahead and click on this link. Okay, there's a video here you'll see. Basically what Autotune does is it kind of, by itself, and the word auto, it gives the aircraft a twitch, and then it measures how well the aircraft responds to that movement and adjusts the PID gains or PID values to help the aircraft react better to the twitch, to be more responsive, to be a very, we'll call it a tight tune rather than sloppy. Okay, so this video goes over, it kind of shows you what it's going to do. The aircraft will just twitch in all the different axes. Okay, but down here we have the setup before flying auto tune mode. Okay, you can do it a number of different ways. You can set up one of your flight modes to be, you do need to set up one flight mode to be altitude hold. Sorry about that. You can set up an RC channel or auxiliary function switch to turn auto tune on and off. Okay, you can also set auto tune as the flight mode, I prefer to do auto tune on a separate switch. So I would have my flight mode switch and altitude hold, and then I would flip another switch and that would engage auto tune. Some people put auto tune on their flight mode switch position. Okay. You can do either way. I find it easier to separate the two things from each other. But basically, you'll be flying these auto-tune flights in altitude hold mode, essentially, and then the auto-tune will be twitching around as you're in altitude hold. Okay, and so really all you do is need to set up an auxiliary function. So just like your motor kill switch or your arm switch, you're going to go to your options page. Let's do it real quick here. Okay, so we see these RC options. So you would assign a channel to this, of course. And let's see if we can find auto-tune. I really wish these were in. There we go. Alphabetical order auto-tune mode. Okay. So if I had set this up like this, my channel 10 switch, whatever switch I assigned to channel 10 would engage auto-tune mode. Okay. And you should be able to see that engage on Mission Planner in the flight modes area when you engage auto-tune, and or see a message when you engage auto-tune. Okay. So you'd have that set up there with a switch to turn it on. You'll take off and stabilize if you want to. Get into altitude hold. You'll then flip the auto-tune switch and it will start to twitch back and forth. Okay. Other things down here, they give you notes. I found that yaw takes a very long time to tune, or it takes the longest, I guess. We're going to tune roll, pitch, and yaw axes of the aircraft. Okay. Yaw takes a very long time, and it's always a bummer if you run out of battery halfway through one of these axes because you got to kind of start over. So I would recommend looking at the auto-tune axes parameter and setting one axis at a time, honestly, would probably be the best way to do it. So let's go in here and I'll show you that to you. Auto-tune axis. Okay, so here we see you can say roll, pitch, yaw, yaw D. Okay, we're not going to worry about yaw D too much for this class. You can't do that. But if we select this, you see the value again changes. If we're going to do all three, all four, okay, it will just go through them individually if you have them all selected, like it'll finish roll and it'll just start on pitch. But I would recommend just doing one at a time to try to make sure you get it done inside of the single battery you have. Typically roll and pitch aren't too long, especially if it's not that windy of a day, but yaw will take a little while, so it might need a separate battery for yaw, and you can do roll and pitch together, for example. Okay. One thing that's really important when you're doing this is because you're sitting out there with the copter to wait for it to finish, is to make sure that you have your fail-safe set up. Okay. All right. At a minimum, you want to have a battery fail-safe set up to just land the aircraft, and a radio fail-safe to just land the aircraft. Now you have a GPS on board now, but we haven't tested it yet in the class. So let's not use RTL until we're sure that it works. Okay. So make sure you have land set as your fail-safe. That way, if you get low on battery where you're doing your auto tuning, it'll just come down and land on the ground, out in the field, wherever it's at. You're typically not doing the tuning too far away from yourself, so it's not too far to walk or anything like that. Okay. I would leave the auto tune's aggressiveness at the default. That's fine. Okay. And we don't have a copter with props this large, so I wouldn't worry about that either. All right. Okay. This battery voltage scaling of PID gains, okay, talks about adjusting the PIDs based on battery, because as your battery gets lower and lower, it will need to give different values to the motors in order to keep the aircraft tuned well. Okay, so voltage scaling. Okay, we haven't really done this in the past in the class, and it works okay, but you can enable this if you want to. All right, and that might help your tune overall. Okay. All right, and here this just talks about how to actually do auto tune. Okay, the main thing here is if there is any breeze, which there is at the AST field, typically a little bit of breeze, you want to be with your copter basically twitching 90 degrees to the wind direction. So you can look at the flags across the street or something, or any kind of wind indicator, and see where the wind's coming from. And so, okay, I'm going to angle my copter so it's twitching back and forth. You can see the twitch here would be left and right, whereas this is the nose of the copter. So the vehicle is facing into the wind and twitching 90 degrees to the wind. Excuse me. If we're going to do the other axis, we would turn the copter so the side of the copter is into the wind, and we're twitching frontwards and backwards. Okay. And this just kind of tells you what it's going to do, and going to twitch for a few minutes. So we'll repeat forward and back. Okay. Anytime you need to reposition the copter, because it will be an altitude hold, so it can drift, right? It's not going to hold position. You can just move it back over in front of you and let it go, start twitching again. As soon as you release the sticks, when you're not controlling it anymore, besides throttle, then it will start twitching and just pick up where it left off. Okay, so if there's a bit of a breeze, it can be helpful to move the copter. Say the breeze is moving from your right to your left. It can be helpful to move the copter a little ways past you to the right, so it kind of twitches as it's drifting across in front of you, and then you move it back and do it again. It kind of just keeps passing in front of you as you move it back and let it start twitching again. Okay, the important thing here is with your switch, your auto-tune switch turned high, okay, it will be doing auto-tune. Once it finishes, okay, it'll just kind of sit there. Now, if you're looking at the mission planner ground control station, you'll see messages that say auto-tune finished, auto-tune success, things like that. Okay, but if you're not looking at it or no one can look at it for you, you might be wondering what's going on. Did it finish the axis or not? Okay, typically when it finishes an axis, it will kind of just sit there and hover. All right. In order to save the new PID values it has generated from the auto-tune, you need to land the aircraft with the auto-tune switch in the high position or auto-tune turned on. Okay. If you forget that, it won't save the PIDs that you generated. They'll be in the log somewhere. I'll show you where to find them in the log, but they won't save to the aircraft itself. You have to go and manually put them back in. All right, so if you're happy with the PIDs, leave the channel 8 in the high position, okay? Land and disarm to save the PIDs permanently, okay? There's some ways you can try the new PIDs out and try them in flight and stuff like that. Typically, they work pretty well for these copters, but you can try them in flight and then save them, or you can just save them and then try them out. It's up to you, okay? You can try auto-tune with position hold, as in with your GPS. If you haven't tried your GPS yet, I wouldn't recommend this, okay? And I I'd rather you guys do an altitude hold mode. Where is that? Altitude hold. Okay. It's just a little bit more simple. All right. Okay, this video is getting pretty long, but basically once you have the aircraft tuned, you will have some different values in this page than the default values. Okay, so that's one way you show me that you tuned it. Okay, the other way to show me that you tuned it is that you have a data flash log showing all the auto-tune messages as it's tuning in flight, and I'll be able to see those messages as I review the log. Okay, so that should give you an overview of the assignment. Okay, again, these are the things you're going to turn in. Okay, these 4 items here, and I will have a couple other videos talk specifically about these 2 different aircraft that we're using this semester. All right.